Hello and welcome everyone, wherever you are, whether it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for you on this wonderful Valentine's Day. We're happy you get to spend Valentine's Day with us today, and we're bringing you a very, very insightful program and content to make it worth your while. My name is Katja Gagan, and I work at external comms at Brex, and I'm delighted to be here today with Camilla and Ben to talk about top 3 ways to meet your 2023 goals. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through an introduction, talk about why we always start with the customer, why it's important to measure inputs, not outputs, and why you need to adjust actions, not goals. To make this interactive, we also want to listen to you and hear your questions. So please make good use of the chat function and the Q&A function in the Zoom dashboard. And we will also record this meeting and share with you as a recording and post on our website after the webinar. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers in just a second, but to set the stage, we all know that we are halfway through the first quarter of 2023, so all the good plans that you have started to put into action should now be in full swing. But when is the right time to check in and see if you're tracking against your goals? And what do you do to course correct if you have to, or what do you do to stay the course? We'll hear about this and more from our speakers today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Camilla.
Hello, everyone. This is Camila Moraes. I lead operations here at Brex, which also includes risk and customer experience. I have been with Brex for 4.5 years, initially running finance and then moving to operations. So yes, Ben and I kind of like switched roles. Coming from the finance background, financial planning and discipline were always top of mind. I've led zero-based budget implementations in the past, but one thing that I learned most at Brex is that customers always come first, even and maybe especially in a micro scenario like this. So I'm excited to talk about how Ben and I butt heads about this and how we approach planning here at Brex.
Great to be here with you as well, Camilla. So hi, I'm Ben. I've been at Brex just shy of 5 years now. And over that period of time, I've had just as many roles. I joined Brex to lead operations like Camilla does today when we were just 15 people. Fast forward 2 years and I moved into the role of Chief of Staff to our 2 co-CEOs and co-founders, Enrique Dubugras and Pedro Franceschi. And as part of that role, I ran our business development group for 6 months, our marketing group for 6 months. I ran our people team and recruiting team for 3 months. And as Camilla alluded to, I've now switched into our finance and accounting role and running those teams. So very excited to be here speaking with you all about planning and how we're thinking about 2023 goals, and looking forward to the session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction to you both. We have an international team here today with folks from Europe, Brazil, Australia, as you can hear by our accents. So happy Valentine's Day around the world. And with that, as Camilla alluded to, it makes sense to always start with the customer. Why is that, Camilla?
I mean, if you don't have customers, you don't have business, right? So let me quote what our co-CEO, Pedro Franceschi, said in a recent Brex All Hands meeting. At Brex, we measure success of our product the same way customers do, and orient our actions around increasing the business value they get from Brex. And to be honest, this is not easy. Last quarter, Pedro even asked me and a bunch of other senior leaders here at Brex to invite the customers to our quarterly results review. Think about whatever, like your QBR, monthly BR. So that's what Pedro basically asked us, okay, let's bring the customers in. It was definitely a bold ask, and I've never heard of anything like that. But bringing the customer to the real business performance discussion forced us to measure success the same way that our customers actually do. So before we get into the details of strategic planning, if or when you need to revisit your finance plan throughout this year, I want to invite you to always look through that with customer lens. So thinking that customer focus is key, right? One quote that I really like from Jeff Bezos is, if you're long-term oriented, customer interest and shareholder interests are aligned. So trust me with that, because what I'm going to say, it's very easy to say actually, but very hard to put in practice. So first thing is, investors and boards provide great advice, but they don't know your business as your customers. They are not everything. Then prioritize what we hear from the customers, because you also have to stay focused. This is extremely hard because it's very tempting to act to every negative feedback. Let's say you get an NPS review, you're launching a product, and you think, oh, now our customers are saying that, now you have to pivot. So this is actually a common thing that you think, oh, I need to redo everything because some of our customers are saying that. My suggestion here is, if feedback is tied directly to your goals, then you act. If feedback is not tied to your goals, then you wait. That's why we have the plan. That's why we have Ben here at Brex to help us going through that. And that's why you need to prioritize where to invest. So let's talk a little bit about ranking spend priorities. I like the simple version here because it's basically what I just said in a graphic, right? So I think the challenge is how we can follow our mission and visual and business goals, right? How we tie that like to what the customer needs. So in a time with like limited resource, as most of us are right now, we invest on what makes sense to our customers the most. What makes your customer happy? This is like how we think at Brex, and whatever we want to make the customers happy, we invest in them so we keep our customers. So before it gets impossible to put all of that into practice, let's talk about the key ways of like how Brex has done that so far. So the first thing that I like to say is at Brex, we follow a written culture. We have like memos for everything. So any decision that we make here at Brex requires a written memo. And every memo starts with the session, starts with your customer. So seriously, like any template, whatever you're going to do to whoever you're going to present, we actually ask all the employees, all the teammates, all the leaders to come with like customers' anecdotes to provide examples of like whatever they're going to propose actually impacts the customer. So this is one. Another one that I really like is Pedro Franceschi, our co-CEO, he starts every company all hands meeting with a customer example that reminds us on what we do in the end of the day, right? Then I mentioned in the past, but we have the customer advisory board, right? We do not only present the result to the leadership, we bring the customers in and we present the results to them. Not only results, we also present like any product release, we test with them like before it goes live. I think the point here is that we are obsessed about creating meaningful and measurable business value for our customers. And by creating that, we believe that we can be on track of our goals. So thinking about our goals, I want to move to Ben so he can talk a little bit more how he actually put all of that into practice.
Appreciate it, Camilla. So I think, the first thing I'd want to start with is, a quote from Andy Grove, who famously said that you become what you measure. And so ultimately, what you measure really does matter. So, on that basis, you need to choose your metrics wisely. Firstly, no matter what your metrics are you choose to measure your business, you need to make sure that they're inputs and you set your targets around those. If you deliver on these inputs, not only will you meet or exceed your outputs for your business, but you'll do it in a more reliable and predictable way because you'll better understand the drivers of your business. So what you choose these metrics to be is entirely driven by the focus you want to drive within your business. And a key word I want to highlight there is focus. I think if you have too many metrics that you're continuously tracking, it becomes really hard for the average employee of your company to understand like what really matters and ultimately like what they should be focused on. And so, kind of confining this within Brex, for example, we have 5 overarching, what we call big rocks, which are essentially, how you can think of our version of objectives if you're familiar with the OKR framework. And so each of these big rocks is a key area of focus for our business, and it's owned by one of the executives on the leadership team. And then we have sort of 3 to 5 supporting key results that ladder up to that objective. And so by having these sort of big rocks, we're able to orient the entire company around these goals. And also, the company and the teams beneath them can ultimately ensure that their goals ladder up to these overarching objectives to ensure that the impact that they're having is really driving the business forward in the way we want to. I want to talk about some of the metrics and how to think about like input metrics versus output metrics. So, take customer sentiment, for example. So at Brex, we do track NPS, but it's not really a key metric that we focus on day to day because, ultimately it is an output and lagging metric. By the time you're measuring a customer sort of net promoter score, they've already had a series of events with you and a series of interactions with you. And so really getting a better signal up sort of the funnel in terms of understanding like conversion, win-loss rates, product adoption, engagement, customer SLAs, things like that. There are much more leading metrics that I think are really important to focus on versus NPS, which is kind of the resultant metric after all those things are said and done. The other thing I want to kind of call out is that, there is this habit, I think, especially in early stage, growth stage businesses, to focus metrics on net new customers. So thinking about like acquisition related metrics, but it's really important that you value and remember your existing customers, especially in a challenging macroeconomic environment. You've already spent this time, this energy, money to acquire these customers, and ultimately they're now yours to lose. And so you really do want to make sure you don't have like a leaky bucket with churn, because it doesn't bode well for you and your business if you're unable to retain the customers you have today, especially as you're thinking about this in the context of maybe you need to do a fundraise down the road, or maybe you need to sort of, show to externally that you're really growing, whether it's to secure a strategic partnership. People will want to see that you have a really good retention of your existing customers to show that as you think about acquiring net new customers, they won't be just sort of churning from you some months or years later. And I think ultimately, the thing you really want to ensure about these metrics is that they enable you to get the earliest insights into the health and performance of your business and just ruthlessly prioritize them. This will ultimately be how you can ensure you're staying on top of your customers, both existing and net new. So I've talked a little bit about metrics and tracking. Ultimately not everything goes according to plan, and that's ultimately where life gets interesting. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about like what happens if you're not meeting your goals, or like what happens if you're finding you're not hitting the targets you wanted to achieve. The first thing I want to really emphasize here is like avoid changing the plan. I think at the end of the day, you need to focus on which things you need to adjust, if any, to stay the course, but ultimately your goals need to stay the same. So I think, the reason for this is, when you think about whether it's on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, a half yearly or annual basis, when you want to do a look back on your business and see how you performed, if you've continued to move your goals because you've sort of seen some gaps widening, you'll never really have a true sense of how you performed over that given period of time. I think what you want to do is you want to pick the cadence of reviews to identify any gaps against the plan and then determine the actions that you want to take. So ultimately, if you think you're going to miss a goal, figure out what you need to close that gap, whether it's a marketing push, a new campaign, some other sort of lever you can pull. But ultimately, as I was sort of alluding to before, you won't know whether you've succeeded or not if you continually sort of move the goalposts throughout a given period. I think another point to sort of talk to, and Camilla kind of talked about this as it relates to like negative customer feedback, is I think you need to be really careful and selective about what you analyze. Take Brex as a business, for example. We have a ton of data constantly being sort of provided to us from our customers. And there is this sort of tendency to sort of want to analyze everything under the sun, especially if you're a sort of a data-driven company. But doing so, you have two downsides sort of you need to be mindful of. One is you risk burning a lot of internal resources in analyzing the business versus actually doing business. And obviously, that doesn't help your customers. And then the second one is you need to be careful that you don't respond to all stimuli because ultimately it can create thrash within your organization. And so what I mean by that is like, for example, how we do it at Brex, we have a bi-weekly check-in across those 5 top goals or 5 big rocks I was kind of alluding to earlier, and seeing how we're progressing against each. And if one of the metrics that underpins those goals starts to sort of blink red and maybe suggest that there's some weakness or some softening that we want to investigate, you should be employing an element of judgment to know, like, are we going to just watch it and keep an eye on it? Is it something that we think is transitory? Is there actually a gap or a missing sort of thing that we want to close, and therefore, investigate the metrics to understand the why and why you're missing the goal. And if you do find that there is a real concern there and there's something that you need to address, then obviously at that point, deploy the resources, the people and such to act. And I think ultimately, when you think about, how to stay the course, the tone does come from leadership. At the end of the day, every group has their key areas of focus, and it can be very easy for them to sort of not have the sort of big picture understanding of how does their specific area of focus ladder up to overall company goals. And so when something's sort of awry in their area, they may think, it's the biggest and most important thing within the company to focus on. And I think that's really where leadership having the breadth of oversight needs to come in and help people understand about okay, is this actually something that you need to go and address? Is this something that, okay, you can let it sort of, the fire burn a little bit because ultimately your overarching goals are still on track? This is ultimately a judgment for leadership, and the tone needs to be set for that so as to ensure that over the company, everyone knows sort of where they're working towards.
Awesome. So trying to put it all together and thinking about the pillars of our planning and execution, right? I actually think 1 and 2 here, they are more pillars for running your business, and 3, 4, and 5 actually pillars for how you planning a successful strategic planning and how you actually deliver on that. So I know I sound a little bit obsessed, but yes, number 1 point, customers should always come first in the business and on every single planning, right? Then there is the second thing that Ben also talked about, which is measuring your inputs, which is basically focus on the leading indicators. This, as I mentioned, this can go even beyond planning itself, because the reality is that the more that you get the leading indicators, the more that you can make better business decisions, right? I love this one because even from my early days in finance, I used to sell this a lot to investors, because that's what actually differentiated Brex when we created our first underwriting model, which was basically the credit card for startups. For that, we were super simple, but also super clear that we shouldn't be looking at the past history, because startups just, they don't have a lot of historicals or financials, right? So what would be the leading indicators for those companies when we thought about underwriting? And I think even this business concept apply here for planning. And then the last 3, which are very much tied to planning, and a little bit of a recap of what's been said, no matter the size of your company, those are what I call the fundamentals of planning that help us focus on execution. So planning should wrap up at prior end, if you didn't finish yet, prior to a new cycle. But the main point here is don't drag planning forever into the months that you should actually be executing. Planning is great, but you need to execute against that. And then when the goals are set, the goals are done. I think a big mistake that I see a lot of folks doing is trying to adjust the goals because something happened. You shouldn't do that. You track performance, you react to the performance, you slightly change your tactics, but you don't actually change the goals. So then this is the last piece too, because in the end of the day is, okay, tracking performance, you revisit the metrics, you revisit how you're doing, but again, not revisiting your goals.
Yeah, and I think, just sort of echoing what Camilla's saying, I think you need to understand is that planning, and I'm sure you all know this, planning for a 50-person company obviously looks very different than planning for a 250-person company, and is very different from a 1,000-person company. Camilla and I have been here through the Brex evolution of seeing us go through those various growth stages, and planning today for us looks very different than planning did, way back when. And I think, the thing to be mindful of is ultimately that no matter what size you're at, planning can be that burden that Camilla has sort of alluded to, and really can be a distraction from the business and can take you sort of your focus off the doing the business side. So whether you plan in monthly cycles, which is a little frequent, quarterly, or Brex, we now do it semi-annually, or if you're, so large like in Amazon, you're doing it on a 3-year basis almost. I think you just need to make sure that you're tailoring your planning cadence for your business to make sure that if you were to aggregate all the time in a given year that you are planning, it is still by far the minority of your time. You don't want to be spending several months of the year just doing planning. And I think ultimately, you know, my experience, and I think Camilla will agree with this, like planning will take up the amount of time you give it. You know, I think that there is obviously, you can only shorten it so far to make sure everyone's on the same page. You've been able to get the right input from different stakeholders to make sure that your plans make sense. You know, you need to be careful about walking that fine balance between, you know, what can be done in 2 weeks versus 4 weeks versus 6 weeks. Like, I think, you know, the goal overarchingly for everyone is planning should be streamlined, it should be lightweight, and it should be efficient. And I think typically, you know, as I was sort of saying, planning will give the time you give it. So as a result, will take the time you give it. So, you know, you can be a little bit, you know, aggressive and just sort of only start planning at a certain point in time in your given year. So as a forcing mechanism or function, so that, you know, between, you know, say 6 weeks out from the end of the year, that's when you kick off planning with the knowledge that by the end of the year, you're done. That way you're constraining planning for 6 weeks. So that's a pretty like easy but effective way of implementing planning and something to consider. And ultimately, you know, as you grow it and as Brex has grown, as I was sort of alluding to, you know, the expectation would be your cycles become less frequent, but more long-term as you scale, as you have a more established strategic vision, as you have more established products, you should be able to sort of not only just see the next quarter ahead, but at least the next half, next year, and how that all ladders up to your longer-term objectives as a company. It's been awesome chatting with you guys today, and I'd love to have any questions that you may have of either Camilla or I. But hopefully this has been helpful to you as you think about not only, you know, the planning cycle you just went through and reflecting on that, but for future planning cycles and also how to track your goals throughout this given quarter, half, year, however you manage your metrics. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much to you both. So we're now moving into the interactive part with the Q&A. And I'm going to kick us off with a question to you both, Camilla and Ben. Now the new year has started. Obviously, Brex is putting its good plan to work as well. Have you seen any surprises so far, or have you made any adjustments that you didn't plan for? Tell us a little bit about stories from the trenches as to what you're dealing with.
Yes, I can start with this one. So I wouldn't say a surprise specifically, but one thing that we know about our business is a little bit seasonal, right? And beginning of the year, it's normally a very busy time for financial folks, trying to finalize like their year ends, like their reporting. And for us that are selling to financial folks, it may be like a different time than like, I mean, it's be less busy time for us. But with that said, there are so many things that we need to do to keep like our motion going. So what we did here at Brex, we planned our biggest like sales kickoff, like we ought to call like Brex revenue, with like all the sales teams, like all the go-to-market teams actually together. So we basically use the time, okay, this is the time that maybe we have a little bit more of free time because our customers are focusing on their business. Let's use this to also plan. So we kind of like adapted our planning and our execution to our customers' timeline too. So like every single business is different and every segment that you sell may also be different. But I think that was a good example of like how we try to adapt and we better manage our resource to be able to deliver.
Yeah, and I think just on that note specifically, like when I reflect on our sort of 2023 planning that we completed at the end of the year, we also know that end of quarter and end of year is also a really busy time for us as a business. And so we didn't want to have, you know, planning being a sort of distraction to a lot of teams, like at the very sort of final weeks of December. And so we sort of were very intentional about wrapping up planning sort of earlier in December, so as to ensure that even though we technically had until the end of the year, before, you know, obviously 2023 kicks off and you would need to have that plan ratified, we weren't sort of drawing teams away from doing business to focus on planning, which seems like a poor use of time at that given moment, given, you know, how busy, to Camilla's point, we were, given our customers were really actively engaging with us and wanting to sort of do business with us ahead of their new year.
Great, thanks so much. And another question. So we're obviously living in interesting times. The market environment is still volatile. What's your advice? What are opportunities that companies could seize on? And while everyone is expected to do more with less, what are some pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I can start with that. And Camilla, would love for your input as well. I think ultimately, you know, I would say this is the time to be very focused and disciplined on your business and what investments you're making in your business. And so that isn't to say that, you know, you should be reducing costs across the board, left, right, and center, because ultimately, especially for early stage businesses, you still need to continue to make investments in your product, in your customers, and everything to grow. So I think it's just about really honing in on the critical aspects of your plan and really the most important levers that you can pull to set up your customers and therefore yourself for success, and make sure you're sort of investing in those areas. And then, maybe back in 2020, 2021, there was probably more sort of a notion of trying out sort of random side projects and seeing how they gain traction as potential incremental areas of revenue growth or growth for your business, generally speaking. I would say the hurdle rate that investment or that side project needs to clear is just much higher now. And so I think it's about being very conscious about your business's capital, your runway, how you're sort of, ensuring that you're continuing to show traction, show growth, but really sort of focusing where you can and eliminating a lot of distractions. And planning is a prime example of this, right? Like, you can plan to the cows come home, so to speak, but that will ultimately not, be what, drives your business forward. And so I think just being really disciplined and focused is probably the most important, especially given the macroeconomic environment.
Super. I would go back to that graphic that we show, right? Whatever is your goal, make sure that you make the investments to what's most critical to your customers too, because that's the hard decision that you need to make. I mean, stopping investing may not be the right answer, and I would say it's probably not the right answer, but it's where you invest and what is critical to your business. If I would add one other thing, and Ben mentioned that, I think the retention of your customers, you already acquired them, you already spend the money to have those customers, right? So this is also super important. So you want to make sure that it's not only about growing, but keeping your business health. So if you already have customers, what is critical for them and why they chose you, keep them, keep the good there so they keep with you. I think that's also super important. So we don't have to reinvest to acquire new customers.
Great. And another question, Ben, you mentioned that the leadership sets the tone, but you also need to drive alignment right across the leadership team. What are some best practices here?
Yeah, so we have a sort of daily stand-up. We have as a leadership team each morning for 15 minutes. We're a remote company, so therefore our leadership team is spread throughout the continental US. And so, that's a really important touch point, just so we can kind of stay abreast of, what is top of mind for people, but also, it's very much important part of building rapport and maintaining that rapport amongst the team. And then I think, we run a sort of weekly meeting on Thursdays for an hour, where we're sort of going across, those big rocks I was sort of alluding to, talking about our progress, any areas of concern, anything we need from each of the areas of functional ownership of the leadership team to ensure we're kind of all rowing in the same direction. And then ultimately, we're very, Camilla alluded to this earlier, we have a written-based culture at Brex. We do a lot of decision-making through memos, and we make sure to share them broadly, so we're receiving input and feedback across the board. So as to ensure, once a decision is made, there is that broad-based alignment with the key stakeholders necessary. And so I think, a lot of that is about ensuring that you're continuing to move with a sense of urgency and keeping things going forward fast, but ensuring that you're not having to double back on and revisit decisions that were made because they were made too hastily or they were made with incomplete data. So I would think, there's sort of that analogy of make sure you sort of measure twice, cut once, as it relates to thinking through, how to think through your goals and how to think through the things and decisions you're making. And so I would say, take the time you need to make fully informed decisions so that when you do have that alignment, it sticks and you don't find yourself revisiting decisions, down the road, which ultimately takes more cycles.
Super. I know we are at time, but one thing that I would say is, we also have this thing that is called the big rocks. They mentioned that's the 5 big rocks. We repeat them all the time. And it's so clear for everyone in the organization, hey, in the time, in this macro environment, you need to stay focused. So if we have very simple 5 goals for the whole company that everyone can follow, that all the decisions and all the investments are made based on those goals, then everything goes smoothly. So I think this helps getting this tone from the leadership, which in our case are our big rocks.
Well, thank you so much. This concludes the webinar today. Thanks for spending part of your Valentine's Day with us today. You're very loved by Brex wherever you are, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Check out your emails for the recording or go to our website, and we hope to see you at another Brex webinar soon.